This is Bishop Michael Curry, and you're listening to The Way of Love. In this episode, I'm thrilled to be joined by my fellow Tar Heel and brother in ministry, the Reverend J. Sidebotham. Jay is an artist, an Episcopal priest, and the founder of Renewal Works and co-creator of My Way of Love, a personal guide for your spiritual journey.
I had always felt that the thing that animated my own priesthood, my own work in parishes, was the privilege of watching people grow spiritually. I had always sort of confused that with church activity. If you do more stuff in church, you'll grow spiritually. That's not true, actually, we're finding. What we came to understand with spiritual growth is really about growing in love of God and love of neighbor. It's a matter of the heart. And how do we help people get a sense of where that's happening and what's getting in the way of that? And how can people grow spiritually?
My Way of Love is a free resource that offers coaching and tips that can help folk grow by following the 7 practices for a Jesus-centered life. Turn, learn, pray, worship, bless, go, and rest. Practices that help all of us, me included, grow deeper in the love of God, neighbor, and ourselves. Hello and welcome again to Way of Love, our podcast about the way of love and living it and actually making a difference in this world, following in the footsteps of Jesus of Nazareth. And I am so happy to have my friend and fellow Tar Heel here in the great state of North Carolina. I'm in Raleigh and he's in Wilmington, the Reverend J. Sidebotham. Jay, it's great to have you with us and thank you for this.
Thank you, Bishop Curry. It's an honor to be with you, an honor to be invited into this conversation. And I just am so thrilled with the launch of My Way of Love, which is a new ministry coming out of your office, which is really offers some clear next steps for people in their own spiritual journey. My Way of Love grows out of some work we've done with Renewal Works. I serve as director of Renewal Works, which is a ministry of forward movement, which is really just all about discipleship. Scott Gunn, who runs Forward Movement, says we're not a pamphlet business, we're a discipleship business. And I think that My Way of Love sort of grows out of that and provides a way for people to get a sense of where they are in the spiritual journey. It begins with an inventory that they take, which talks about their own beliefs and practices and the ways they serve in the world, and then offers over the course of eight weeks, a series of emails that are tied to the 7 verbs of your way of love, which are awesome. And I think they're really just addressing a deep need in the Episcopal Church, which is for people have a desire to grow spiritually, but they're not exactly sure how to do that and what that looks like. And so I'm so grateful, Bishop, for your articulation of the way of love in those 7 verbs. And this is a very kind of hands-on, practical way to try that out, see what that looks like in real life. So I'm excited about it. Thank you for making it happen.
Well, you've done it, and I got to tell you, I went and took the inventory myself.
What'd you think?
It's incredible. It really is incredible because you do the spiritual inventory, and then I get an email every week.
Right.
And what I love about it has kind of a little, because of a meditation, but it's a very practical meditation.
Right.
That kind of connect our faith and the practice of it, and then it leads, got a prayer and some suggestions and ideas on that's actually tailored to how I answered in the spiritual inventory. It's really cool. I mean, it's better than the computer stuff where you get an inventory and then you get an email every week. This is much better.
Well, we've been doing it for a couple years under the title of Renewal Works for Me, which grew out of just requests that we got for people to have, a sense of where they were individually in their spiritual life. I sometimes referred to the work as a spiritual Fitbit. It was, just a way of sort of exercising spiritually and having some sense. But again, tying that to your 7 verbs, worship, pray, learn, study, go, bless, rest, I think provides a coherence and a real map for people who are just eager. I mean, there is just, and it's COVID intensified. I think there's just an eagerness to go deeper in the spiritual
Yes.
life. I don't know if you, I bet you see that all over the place, but it's just deep. It's just deep.
I've not seen it in this way before. I've got to tell you, I've not seen it in this way. And so I'm on week 5. And so I take each one and the suggestions and ideas and kind of tailor them to me for
Right.
the next week.
Yeah.
It's wonderful. Well, let me ask you this, because you all have done something in renewal work, which there's actual research. I don't mean research to scare anybody off, but you've actually delved into the spiritual life of Episcopalians
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
and where we're strong and where we have some growth edges. Tell us a little bit about that work with Renewal Works, which is behind My Way of Love.
Yeah, well, yeah, Renewal Works. We've been in doing this for about 8 years, and we've worked with about 300 congregations. So we aggregate that data. Renewal Works process, asks a congregation to take an online inventory. It's longer than the inventory for My Way of Love, more extensive. It's anonymous so that you get the aggregate for the congregation. But this is what kind of prompted people to want to do My Way of Love, because people would answer these questions, but they didn't really get a readout of where they were individually. But what Renewal Works does is sort of take a picture, a snapshot of the congregation, and then we aggregate that for the whole Episcopal Church to sort of get a sense of where we are. We are seeing a distinctive culture, and you'll have to shut me up because I can talk about this for hours, Bishop. But
Before you go on,
yeah,
everybody, I want to make sure everybody knows we're talking about spirituality.
yeah,
Yeah, we're actually talking about a snapshot.
of the spiritual life. Yeah,
That's it. Yes.
and particularly, why I got into this was I just, I had always felt that the thing that animated my own priesthood, my own work in parishes, was the privilege of watching people grow spiritually. And I had
Uh-huh.
always sort of confused that with church activity. If you do more stuff in church, you'll grow spiritually. That's not true, actually, we're
Mhm.
finding. Sometimes we just burn
Yeah.
people out,
It's not.
make people mad,
Yes.
or make people bored, which is the worst. Um, but
Yes. The greatest sin of all.
yeah, exactly. And it happens way too often. But I appreciate what you've brought to the church, particularly because I think what we came to understand with spiritual growth is really about growing in love of God and love of neighbor. It's a matter of the heart. And how do we help people get a sense of where that's happening and what's getting in the way of that? And how can people grow spiritually? So there's a lot of things we find. We do out of the Renewal Works research. We identify a spiritual continuum, which is a linear model of spiritual growth. It's not the only model, but it's a model of spiritual growth. And it
Mhm.
identifies people sort of falling in categories, not unlike when they take My Way of Love, you'll get a snapshot of your spiritual profile. So people are exploring or growing or
Mhm.
deepening or centered. About 3/4 of Episcopalians are in exploring or growing stages of the journey. They have they have, how shall I say this? They have growth opportunity.
Uh-huh. Mhm.
I mean, I'm so interested. I find so many people who the idea that they're on a spiritual journey or that spiritual growth is a high value, that's news to them. That's something they hadn't heard before.
Uh-huh. Sure.
And they want to know how to do that, which is, again, why I love My Way of Love, because it's such a practical way to do that. But we have so many people in the Episcopal Church who are in those early stages of spiritual growth. Doesn't mean a lot of them have been in the church for decades. A lot of them have been sitting in the pew for decades, but they haven't really kind of wrapped their
Mhm.
minds around that knowledge, that idea that what this is about is growing in love of God and love of neighbor, and consequently changing the
Mhm.
world. What else about Episcopalians? About half of them, or more than that, come up with a profile of being kind of troubled or restless or hungry for more spiritual growth and looking for the church leaders to help them with that. And a lot of times that's not happening.
Mm.
So that's a big segment of our
Mhm.
churches. We call it trouble. That trouble doesn't quite capture. It's not about conflict so much. It's about just restless, that thing Augustine said, my heart's restless until I find my rest in you, O Lord. And that's a big crowd. Another big chunk, about a quarter of Episcopalians we find are in a archetype that we call, or a pattern we call, extroverted, which means that they are deeply committed to what we call mission and outreach, but they're not entirely clear why that's a Jesus thing, so we direct them to Matthew 25, and talk about that. Then the third category, and about a quarter of the folks, are what we call complacent, which is like, don't bother me. I'm good. I don't need to hear about spiritual growth. I don't really expect very much out of church. I don't know why you're talking about all this. Just leave me alone. And we had one church that.
Can I tell you?
Go.
Go ahead, Jay. No, go ahead, Jay. You made me laugh.
Well, one church came up with his profile, and the rector called me up. He was a buddy, and he called me up and he said, I got my profile. It says we're complacent. I said, so we're changing the tagline of our church, St. Swithin's Church. We're spiritually shallow and fine with that. So that was, I don't think he changed his stationery to reflect that, but the idea was, just, we have a lot of people who, been in church forever and aren't particularly interested in having that transformative experience, that's the one for leaders, and we find the heart of the leader is just key in all of this, that they are working on their own spiritual growth and their own discipleship. But that's a tough one for leaders to address, that complacency. So, but deep spiritual hunger from a lot of folks, a sense that people would like to be more challenged in that same group in their spiritual life. I have a good buddy, Dwight Kahn, who's rector of a church out in Seattle. I don't know if you know him, but he's just awesome. But he says, my church is a gym. My church is a spiritual gym. And I want to bring people, and I want to get them strong. I want to get them stronger, and I want to help them work out. And I want to be a coach. I want to tell them that was great, or I want to smack them upside the head sometimes, But that idea, I just think that's a helpful metaphor for clergy leadership these days, is coach, I think.
Yeah.
So that's kind of what we're learning. A lot of small churches, as you well know. Many of our congregations are tiny, which again is a great value of this My Way of Love thing. It's offered at our favorite price, free, and it can really help a small congregation wrap their minds around these issues of spiritual growth, which I just think are the central issues that the church needs to be dealing with in days ahead. We are finding in COVID, it's interesting, our work has changed a lot in COVID, like everybody's. We are finding that people are diving more deeply into spiritual practices, many of which are found in the prayer book, and they didn't really know they were there. I just hear all over the place, the daily office on Zoom is just ballooning, blossoming, and probably here to stay. Which is awesome. I just think that's cool. And people who never went, never participated in daily office because they didn't want to get up and get dressed up and drive downtown or whatever, can, put on their jammies and make a cup of coffee and say morning prayer. It's just awesome.
Yes. How would you describe your stage of spiritual growth? Are there some spiritual muscles that need strengthening? How might you begin to lovingly stretch those muscles with greater intention? Let me ask you, tell us your story that led you to this work. You've been a priest a long time. You've been around the barn.
I have. I've been a priest 30 years, and I have worked in wonderful places, New York and Washington and North Carolina, and then I was in Chicago. And I was in Chicago at a wonderful church called Church of the Holy Spirit in Lake Forest. and I'd been there about 7 years. And I, as I say, I think the thing that animated my ministry, amidst all the nonsense you put up with when you're a parish priest,
Yeah.
was the privilege. It was the privilege of watching people take steps in their spiritual journey, whether they're just brand new to the church or whether they've been at it for decades. And I felt like I was really good at designing programs and getting church activity and getting people on committees and stuff, but I wasn't convinced in my own ministry that we were really helping people go deeper in their life with God. I just felt like we were missing something,
Yeah.
and I began to cast about. I actually found this resource from a big non-denominational church in the Chicago area, and they had done a lot of this research, which gave us a springboard for this. And the first piece of it was that in their research with thousands of Christians of all sorts was that engagement with Scripture would
Hmm.
change people and would change the church. And so I took that
Huh.
bit of research to heart, and we did we did a program. We read the Bible in a year from September to May, and everybody got charged up about it. And I preached
Uh-huh.
about it ad nauseum. I mean, I just was a nut. I used to be in advertising, so I just hammered home the message. Just we are going to read the Bible in a year, and everybody's going to
Uh-huh.
do it, and you're going to have fun, and all this stuff. It's going to be awesome. There are going to be parts you like and parts you hate. So we had this big push, and I went out to get the morning paper in our little town, the little town paper, and the headline was Episcopalians read the Bible. It was just like this was a news
That
item.
was a headline.
That was the headline. That was the news
This is
item.
news.
This is news. And I always think of the thing you say. I always think about the thing you say about Billy Sunday. What did he say? He came across the prayer book or the Bible or something in a pew.
Oh, yeah.
What did he
Yeah.
say?
And he said, "Heaven help the devil if the Episcopal Church ever wakes up." He actually said it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Reading the prayer book, he said, "Oh, my Lord, heaven help the devil if the Episcopal Church ever wakes up and actually pays attention to what's in this book."
And so much of and what what was so funny was as people started to read the Bible, they go, well, the Bible stole this from the prayer book, as
Yeah.
opposed to recognize right as opposed to
Yes.
recognizing that actually Cranmer
Right.
swiped the whole thing from Scripture. So
Yes.
it was just, and that really changed our congregation actually. I mean, we had a lot of tough conversations about
Uh-huh.
the tough
Uh-huh.
things that are in the Bible, but it
Yeah.
just elevated the spiritual focus, and got people talking about it. When I started Renewal Works, I was working with the church in the diocese, and the rector said, "Well, I like this idea of doing this work, but I don't really like your name, Renewal Works." For a variety of reasons, they had a difficult time with the renewal movement or something. I don't know. I
Oh,
said,
yeah.
"Fine, name it something else. Just come up with your own
Yeah.
name."
Yeah.
And she came back to me and she said, "We're going to call it the Great Conversation."
Mm.
Because I think part of
Mm.
what we try to do in this work is just get people to talk about God in their life. And what's
Yeah.
stunning to me, even the most frozen, chosen, reticent Episcopalian, if you get them in the right setting, they have a story.
Oh, yes.
I mean, I have not met anybody who does not have a story of God in their life. And
Yes.
um, I love what Trisha Lyons is doing with evangelism and stuff. But she's
Yeah.
just awesome at getting people to, just unpack their story, and not
Yeah.
let me tell you mine, but let me
Mm.
hear yours, which is just so critical, I think,
Yes.
in this piece about evangelism. So anyway, so a big part of the work in the inventory and in the workshops that follow is just to get people talking about that very thing. What does it mean to
Uh-huh.
grow spiritually? What does it mean to grow in love of God and love of neighbor? How do we do that? What's getting in the way of doing that? All of the above. So
Mhm. And my way of love is a very practical tool that can help us all do that and really grow for real.
Yeah, and it's just, it's as you say, it's just a practical guide, and emails each week that give you something to work on.
Yeah.
We have found that some churches, particularly some small churches, have done this work and then gotten together, now that everybody's Zoom friendly, gotten
Yeah.
together and just said, "Well, tell me about your week."
Yeah.
And that's been a great resource for some small churches, particularly as people are isolated. And it doesn't need to be a formal program. It doesn't need to be
Mhm.
any clergy. Don't need to prepare anything. It's just, you can just, say, let's talk a Thursday night for an hour about what you're doing and what you're learning and what's hard and what's exciting and all that stuff. So
Well, you have multiple loves, and one of your loves is published every year on a calendar, um, with some rather remarkable cartoons. Tell us about that, and then where that came from in the life of Jay.
yeah. Well, I do a fair amount of artwork. It's so interesting. When I went to seminary some 30 plus years ago, I had to like say, so I'd been working as an illustrator in New York and an animator. I worked for some called Schoolhouse Rock for a while and did illustration work. And part of the deal of going to seminary was like, okay, Jesus, I'm going to give up the artwork to you know be a consummate preacher or something. So I just have to say goodbye to doing
Uh-huh.
the artwork. And after a while, lo and behold, I found that actually it's a good resource in the church.
Yeah.
And I began to do a lot of drawing, particularly with young people, children and stuff. But I found that the parents wanted to watch too. And then 20 years ago, Church Pension Group invited me to do a calendar for each month with stuff about the life of the church.
Uh-huh.
And so I said, sure, I'll do that. That's sort of a fun challenge. And Lord knows the church provides plenty of material. You
Yes,
don't
there
have
is.
to make anything up. You just have to
Right.
keep your eyes open. Lots of material. I'm sure you could send me some cartoon ideas.
Saturday Night Live hasn't got anything on us.
Exactly,
Yes.
exactly. You just keep your big eyes open and your mouth shut. Um, but it was interesting because I've been a parish priest long enough. I said, I would love to do this. I have this one request. Every year we do a cartoon because they're all about church life. I said, I want to do one about the parish secretary or parish administrator or whatever the title might be in your church. And I want to do one about the sexton. And I said, I just want to sing their praises a little bit because I just think they are in a job of 1,000 bosses and probably take a lot of heat,
Yes.
take a lot of heat. And
Mhm.
and I just think we need to sing their praises. So every year, I think there's something about singing the praises of sextons and singing the praises of parish administrators or secretaries or however that job is described. So that's been fun. So yeah, so I've been doing it for 20 years, and it's just, as I say, it's a good outlet for me. I like to draw a lot. I do a variety of kind of pieces
Mm.
of artwork. My dad was an artist and an art director, a creative director. He was a madman um, uh, in,
Oh, uh-huh.
in the '60s,
Uh-huh.
and then his father was an illustrator, and then in New York in the '20s and '30s. So it was just always something that we sort
Wow.
of did as a family thing.
Actually, I wanna ask you, which is a dumb question from somebody who's not particularly creative. How do you do that?
What do you mean?
It's I mean, your calendars are they're hilarious, they're poignant. I mean, it's just I mean, there's enormous you gotta be creative at least 12 times because they're 12 months. So, at least 12 times. I mean, how do you create? You preach, you draw?
I do preach some, yeah, and draw. It's I don't know how it's done. I do whenever I speak at a thing, I always say, if you're bored with what I'm saying or whatever, think of some cartoon ideas and send them to me. So
Uh-huh.
I do get some ideas from
Do you
folks.
really?
One of
Huh.
my favorite ones. Can I tell you one of my favorite?
Yeah.
Can I tell you one of my favorite ones? It came from a friend who's the rector in Tennessee, and he said he was standing at the altar. This is kind of churchy. I don't know. He was standing at the altar, and you know how the acolyte comes with water to wash your hands before the Eucharist.
Yeah.
So the priest gets his hands cleaned with this water and
Uh,
napkin and all this stuff. And the kid comes up, and instead of it's in a silver cruet, instead of the water, he pours the wine over the priest's hands, right?
uh,
Um,
gosh,
instead of the water, because he's
Yeah.
supposed to wash hands, but he picked the wrong thing up, and he looks up at the priest, and he says, "I swear, Padre, it was water when I started out."
Oh,
But he just,
yes.
but that was a real thing. That was a real thing that happened. It wasn't like made up, so you just illustrate that. It's a matter of keeping your eyes open. One of my favorite quotes is G.K. Chesterton, who said, "Angels can fly because they take themselves lightly." I do think, and it's a thing I appreciate about your ministry and your preaching, is that there's a joy and a lightness that, again, the Episcopal Church has not always excelled in joy and lightness of being.
Yeah.
So sometimes
Sometimes it's good.
it just helps to,
Yes, it does.
the more we can tap into that, the more people come to see what Jesus was about, I think.
Yeah.
I don't know.
I think you're right. Well, Jay, you've got all these folk and Episcopalians and other Christians and other people of faith and goodwill listening to this. And I'm just wondering, what would you say? Picture them in your mind. And what would you say, or what would you draw? What's the cartoon? Whatever it is, what would you leave with us?
Oh, wow. That's a good question. A drawing I keep coming back to is that sort of drawing of a road or a pathway going from here to there.
Huh.
So what is the here for you in your own spiritual life? Where are you in this moment? Can you take a sort of a rigorous look in the spiritual mirror and see where you are? And then what is the there? What is the billboard off in the distance that
Oh.
you can see that is something that you aspire to for your own spiritual life? What way do you want to grow? What way do you want to, how do you want the disposition of your heart to be in the future? And what steps, and this is again coming back to my way of love, what specific steps might you take on that roadway? It's not a particularly funny cartoon, but it's, I think, that idea, everybody on this pathway, whatever it is one that matters to God. So it damn well better matter to us.
Yeah. Yes.
So
wow.
Anyway,
Jay, thank you for that. And thank you for all you're doing for Renewal Works and My Way of Love. And we will attach information how folk can get My Way of Love and information on Renewal Works. We'll attach that with this edition of Way of Love. Thank you for being with me, brother. Have a good day. God love you. And God bless.
Thanks.
You can find out more about My Way of Love, including the newest companion resource, My Way of Love for Small Groups, which expands on the individual spiritual journey by offering step-by-step guidance, scriptures, prayers, and reflections for 9 weekly group gatherings. To find it and more, visit episcopalchurch.org/mywayoflove. episcopalchurch.org/mywayoflove. And if you want to go even further, check out Jay's work at Renewal Works and Forward Movement at renewalworks.org. That's renewalworks.org. The Way of Love podcast executive producer is Jeremy Tackett. Our podcast engineer is Ellie Singer. Research and guest relations are managed by Amanda Skofstad. and our project manager is Chris Sycamore. I'm Michael Curry, and I'll see you next time on The Way of Love. God love you.